Well, this past week I was working on an article I was asked to write for the Oxford Companion to Christology on Christ in cinema. And the research for that article was a joy because I had to go back to a lot of my favorite movies that include Christ figures. One of them being Frank Darabont's famous Shawshank Redemption from 1994, which I think is one of the really great Christ figure images in the last 25, 30 years. Like the Christ figure in The Green Mile, in Cuckoo's Nest, and in Cool Hand Luke, the Christ figure in Shawshank is an innocent man who comes into a prison setting, someone that comes into an incarcerated world and shows a way out. And that's a very important dimension of Christology, because look at the Council of Trent that would say we basically are a dysfunctional family, we human beings. Sin has imprisoned us. It's like a shackling of our human nature. What we need is someone who is going to come into that situation, but an innocent. If the person is as shackled as we are, they're not going to free us. But they also have to come into that world to share it. So you see now in Andy Dufresne, who's the main character of the Shawshank Redemption, is just that, an innocent man who finds himself in the midst of a gray, bleak, incarcerated world. From the very beginning, you see that Andy's different. Remember the inmates have this bet set up, which of the new arrivals is going to break first. And a lot of them bet that Andy would break first, this banker, who was obviously very unaccustomed to this world. But of course, Andy doesn't break. He maintains a Zen-like silence that first night. Then they see it. Very early on, Red, who's the narrator of the movie, says he just didn't walk like the rest of us. He walked like someone who was taking a stroll through the park. He was in Shawshank, but not of it. We see it much more clearly in this great scene toward the beginning of the movie when a group of the prisoners have been chosen to work on the roof of a building. They're tarring the roof. And they're happy to be outside, but it's very difficult work doing this tarring on a hot day. So Andy is there with them, and he's been overhearing the guards who were talking. And one of the guards says that, he's losing a lot of money. He should have inherited this money, but he's losing it through taxation and so on. Well, Andy gets up and, breaking every rule of the place, simply walks over to the guards. Well, they're so alarmed, they pull their guns on him. What's he going to do? One of the guards takes him, and he actually dangles him over the edge of the roof, threatening him. How dare you get up and walk over to us? Andy calmly says, I've got a way to help you save all that money. He's a banker. He's a tax, attorney. And he explains to him this tax loophole that would enable him to save his money. So the guy brings him back on the roof, listens some more to him. And finally, Andy says, there's only one thing I'm going to ask as a price for this very worthwhile advice, is could you let my friends here have a cold beer? And so the next scene, the cold beer is being brought up to the roof, is unheard of privilege. Andy is not taking any beer. He just sits, in the roof with a kind of serene smile on his face. What he's done is non-violently, but cleverly, has outmaneuvered the keepers of the incarcerated system. It's very close now to what Jesus does. That Aikido-like move, where you use the momentum of your opponent against him. Jesus outmaneuvering, outfoxing his opponents. One of my favorite scenes in that movie, beautiful scene. Andy's been collecting resources for a library, including books and music. So one day, records arrive. And one of his favorite records, the Marriage of Figaro from Mozart, arrives. Andy sees this record and he remembers the beauty of the music. And he puts it on the turntable to listen. But then he brings over the PA microphone that will broadcast to the whole prison. And he puts the microphone up to the speaker so that now suddenly the glorious music of Mozart is being played all over this dank, gray prison. And the prisoners all stand in the courtyard, just mouths agape at this beautiful music. And of course, Andy is eventually thrown into solitary confinement for this violation of the rules. But for that moment, he allowed beauty to descend into this terrible place. Think of Jesus now, in his preaching, in his teaching, in his miracles. It's as though this great, beautiful bird had landed in the midst of this dire, situation. There's Andy, the Christ figure, bringing a sense of liberation, a sense of beauty into the prison. Now, the movie narratively moves to a climax in regard to Andy and the warden. So the warden is a superficially religious man. He's kind of a fundamentalist Christian, claims to be a Bible believer. Actually, he's a man of tremendous brutality who uses religion for kind of dark purposes. There he's evocative, of course, of the scribes, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the keepers of the religious establishment in Jesus' time, who really were not using religion to liberate people, but precisely to oppress them. So the warden plays that role. He's been using Andy now to do his taxes, but then moving into shadier territory to set up these clandestine bank accounts, and he's redirecting money and laundering money, all this business. So the warden is manipulating Andy. But Andy's finally had it. And after many years in the prison, he decides it's time to escape. And what he's been doing is, over 27 years, with a little rock hammer, he's been creating this tunnel from his cell out to a sewer pipe, which will enable him to get out of the prison. So finally that tunnel is finished, and he tunnels out. But he has to get now into the sewer pipe, which of course is disgusting in every way. He has to get into this tight sewer pipe and then crawl 500 yards out to freedom. What do we find now in the story of Jesus? He's the innocent man in this incarcerated world, the world of sin. He brings a sense of freedom, outmaneuvering the powers that be. He brings a sense of beauty. But then at the climax of his life story, he has to go into the muck and the mud, into the deepest dysfunction of sin and death. He has to, on the cross, crawl his way through what is most dire, objectionable in the human condition. And in that manner, shows the way to freedom. So Andy finally comes out of this terrible tunnel. It's a beautiful scene where he spills out into the water. It's like a baptismal thing. And then he raises his arms in the attitude of the cross. He kind of cocks his head up to the heavens. And so it's an image of the risen Jesus having been liberated from sin and death. The next morning, the warden comes in. Of course, they discover Andy missing. And it's a scene that's very redolent of the empty tomb scenes in the Gospels, because they look into his cell and he's gone. The prisoners look in and they're flabbergasted. The warden is like the Roman guards, or like the officials of the time, shocked by the empty tomb. And they look down this tunnel that Andy's created, and he's escaped. We then discover something really delicious. So Andy's been, helping the warden with these clandestine accounts and money laundering and so on. But what it means is that Andy has complete knowledge of all of these accounts. He knows everything about them. So when he escapes with the warden's suit and shoes. So he's able to put those on, looking utterly respectable. He then goes to every bank in which one of these false accounts have been set up, and he takes all the money. In the process, stripping the warden of his power is undermining the warden. It's a very important theme now in Christology. The church fathers called it the Christus Victor theory. Namely, that Jesus, through his cross and resurrection, has undermined the dark powers. He's outmaneuvered them, outwitted them. What Andy did on the roof and with the Mozart scene now comes to its fullest expression as he outwits and disempowers the warden, who's been holding this prison in thrall. It's like Jesus now outmaneuvering and disempowering the devil. Last scene, last reflection. Red, Andy's disciple, he's a bit like St. Peter to Andy's Jesus. Red finally is paroled. He gets out of Shawshank. And Andy had spoken of the beach at Zihuatanejo in Mexico. That's where he wanted to go if he ever got out. And there he'd live this beautiful life, So Red, through a number of indications Andy had left, finds his way to Zihuatanejo. And the beautiful close of the movie is Red walking along the beach, and he sees Andy. And Andy is working on a boat. He's dressed all in white. He's tanned. I mean, he looks reinvigorated. all in white, and then he sees red coming. As the camera pulls back to kind of a godlike perspective, you see the two of them embracing on the beach. Well, in the Gospels, the risen Jesus, right, says, I will go ahead of you to Galilee. Well, what was Galilee but this beautiful country by the seashore where Jesus first met his disciples? And it becomes evocative in the Gospels of the resurrected life. That's where the risen Jesus will meet them. It's also therefore evocative of heaven, the life of definitive resurrection into which Jesus, liberated from the prison, having shown a way out, now invites his disciples to join him. So red, you might say, is evocative of all Christians who come to the risen Christ at the end of time to be embraced by the shore of the Sea of Galilee. That's Andy at Zihuatanejo. It's a beautiful retelling of the Christ story. And keep in mind, Shawshank is based on a story written by Stephen King. Stephen King also wrote the novel that The Green Mile is based upon. Well, The Green Mile's got a great Christ figure, John Coffey, J.C., of course, Andy Dufresne, A.D., in The Year of the Lord. And so we certainly know that Stephen King loves to play with Christ imagery. I think this movie and the story it's based upon do so in a remarkably clear and compelling way.